Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar with Clean Horizon, where we'll be examining the case for energy storage in Greece and why it is set to become a key European market hub. I'm Andy Colthorpe, editor at Energy Storage News. I'm very happy that today we'll have the opportunity to shine a light onto a market that looks set to emerge rapidly through a combination of drivers, which are based on Greece's specific circumstances as a country and as part of Europe and the European Union. Of course, we'll also hear about the challenges that need to be overcome for this emergence to take place successfully. Now, Greece gets 50% higher solar irradiation than Germany does, and solar power generation there has already overtaken coal. Just in the past few weeks, our sister site, PV Tech, has reported on, for example, the creation of a joint venture by a portfolio company of Macquarie's Green Investment Group and developer Whatcrop to deploy 750 megawatts of solar PV in the next 4 years. Lightsource BP has entered the market and is co-developing 640 megawatt peak of solar. And in the country's most recent renewables tender, which took place in May, 350 megawatts of solar bids were successful. Wind resources are also plentiful in many parts of the country, and as you'll hear from our expert speakers, renewable energy ambitions and targets remain high. As a country with urban populations as well as many islands, there are strong possibilities for different types of energy storage projects, from utility scale to distributed commercial and industrial, and microgrids that pair generation with storage. For example, this year, Greek industrial group Mytilineos has acquired a portfolio of solar and battery storage projects in a €56 million deal. And that includes 21 battery storage sites and 4 solar plus battery projects. On the other side of the coin, you may also have already heard about the project at Tilos, the Greek island which has run almost entirely on renewable energy since about 2017. But aside from this early activity, investor certainty and the economic situation post-pandemic are among the more challenging aspects of market development. And really, we do hear so often that different regions of the world have great potential for energy storage. While the fundamentals of the clean energy transition and need to modernize the world's grid are such that this could be said to be true of every one of those regions, the realization of potential doesn't happen overnight and takes a lot of work. Luckily, as you're about to hear, it appears that Greece's government and regulators are in recognition of the need to push forwards. Clean Horizon CEO Michael Salomon will talk us through some of the facts and figures, explain the drivers and present and forthcoming market opportunities. Clean Horizon's analysis of the market has shown that the fundamental drivers for energy storage in Greece are strong, and we can take a look at some of the specifics in his presentation to follow. We are also very fortunate to be joined today by Konstantinos Petsinis, who is Director of Branch Market Design and Monitoring at Greece's transmission system operator, IPTO, and Dr. George Loizos, who is the Head of Electricity Networks and New Technologies at the Regulatory Authority for Energy. Just before we start, I'd like to note that both George and Kostas are speaking on their own behalf. While the data they present comes from their organizations, answers they give to audience questions and their views are personal opinions, not representative of the transmission system operator or regulatory authority. But we do look forward to hearing their expert views on the important role of energy storage in Greece. And of course, as always, we look forward to hearing from you, the audience. So please put your questions for the speakers in the questions tab on the right-hand side of your screen, and we will save 10 to 15 minutes after the presentations to answer as many of them as we can. And so, without further ado, I'd like to hand you over to our first speaker, Michael Salomon.
Good afternoon and good morning to those of you that are joining us from the other side of the Atlantic. Thank you, Andy for this introduction, and thanks to Caroline and the rest of the Solar Media team for helping us putting this webinar forward. So my name is Michael Salomon. For those that don't know me, I've been running Clean Horizon since I started the company in 2009, and we have been since then and still are a one-stop shop energy storage consultant, acting pretty much all around the world, wherever we believe there's an opportunity for storage. And we serve both as a market analyst and as a technical consultant. So I guess I'll just say a quick, quick intro, a quick follow-up to Andy's intro, and then I will let George from the regulator introduce, I would say, the basics of Greece, while Kostas from the Greek transmission system operator will go a little bit in more details in the way energy markets are organized in the country, and then I'll use what they've said to essentially show you guys that indeed there's a potential for very profitable energy storage business models in Greece. But before I let them, I let them speak, I wanted to say one thing. So first of all, you will get the slides, so you don't need to screenshot it or to read through it very, very briefly. I just thought I would put those words there so everything is clear. But I guess the main reason why we are all here today is specifically prompted indirectly by the European Commission. As you may know, all across Europe, there's this funding facility called the Recovery and Resilience Facility that has been designed to support, I would say, the emergence of Europe from the COVID crisis. And each country was allocated some grants, and in terms of Greece, 17.8 billion of grants were allocated by the European Commission, specifically now. And out of these funds, more than a third of it will be dedicated to the energy transition, which is fine. Okay, great. But really, the reason we're here today is that very specifically 450 million worth of these funds will be allocated to the installation of 1.38 gigawatt of storage in the country. That's number one. Yes, part of that will be provided for pump hydro, but probably the bulk of this fund of these megawatts will be battery or hybrid plants. The very, very important thing to keep in mind are the next 2 points. Number one, these funds are designed to cover up to 40% of the CAPEX of installation of the storage system. So for whoever in the audience that has been involved in energy storage businesses worldwide, 40% subsidy on the CAPEX is huge. I mean, it's better than the best funding scheme out there, which is the investment tax credit in the US, which I think tops up at 26% of the CAPEX. So that's number one. And number two, the Minister of Environment and Energy, Mr. Skrekas, specifically announced to the market that there will be a tender to procure between 500 and 700 of these megawatts by the end of this very year. This announcement was postponed to Q1 2022, but the goal is that by Q2 2023, the government should have selected projects worth between 500 and 700 megawatts of storage projects in the country. So voilà, this announcement that you may have seen in the press prompted us to investigate a bit more the reality of the Greek market for energy storage. And what hopefully we are going to be able to convey is that even though obviously the regulations are still not set for storage, there's many moving parts. There is, if you wish, this strong impetus from the Recovery and Resilience Facility / the tenders that were announced by the government, on top of very, very strong market fundamentals that are super favorable to energy storage. That's according to us. So now I will leave first George and then Kostas introduce a bit more in more detail, I guess, the reality of the Greek market, and then in the end, our sort of wrap up and put some numbers in front of what I've just said, which is that the market fundamentals are great for storage in the country. So George, the floor is yours.
Hello, by my side. I am George Loizos from the Greek regulator. Today I'm going to talk about the Greek electricity context for those who do not know it. I'm going to describe the electricity supply chain and the electricity mix. So in Greece, we are a European country, one of the 27 countries. We follow the European legal framework. We have a regulatory authority for energy, an independent authority, and we have liberalized the electricity market. We have generation, transmission, distribution, and a liberated supply. The PPC, the old national company of electricity, Power Public Corporation, holds 51% of the installed power generation capacity. And the supply is also dominated by PPC. The PPC has approximately 65% of the market, and the rest is to other independent suppliers. In generation, major players are PPC, Elpedison, Mytilineos with Protergia, Terna with Heron, and yes, and some other smaller companies. And the Greek transmission is run by IPTO, Power Transmission Operator, Independent Power Transmission Operator, which is owned 24% by State Grid, and the Distribution System Operator, which is has just been bought. The 49% of Hedno has been bought recently by Macquarie Bank, and the rest is owned by PPC. The suppliers have vertical suppliers, which means they own generating plants, and also which are PPC, Elpedison, Protergia, Heron, and some other companies only. They are applying their energy activity only in the supply, Vattenfall, Zenith, Volton Energy, and so on. So the Greece's electricity generation mix is dominated by natural gas, and as you can see in the graph, approximately 43%, 45% in 2020. And the lignite still represent an important share, as you can see, 15%, and renewables, the rest 35%. So that's a snapshot of the Greek market. Now I'm going to discuss the goals of the National Energy Climate Plan. In this, we have the National Energy Climate Plan is a strategic plan developed by the government with a roadmap to solve energy and climate issues by 2030. Of course, as Michael said, it is backed up by RRF. And in order to allow new renewable energy resources and increase the flexibility of the electric system and the liquidity of the balancing market. So in Greece, we will have a delignitization until 2028. So the graph on the top shows the gradual withdrawal of the remaining lignite plants in Greece. So by the end of 2021, we will have 1,600 megawatts withdrawn. 5 units in 2022 and 3 units in 2023, and one more Ptolemaida 5 will be withdrawn in 2025 unless they change the fuel to natural gas. We will see. Also, in the bottom graph, you can see that Greece plans to double the wind and photovoltaic capacity over the next 10 years. You can see how the graph is increasing. The renewable share will be up to 61% by 2030. So let's move to the following slide. I'm going to talk about the licensing figures in Greece that we have given the past year, actually since the beginning of this year. The numbers are evolving very fast, and the applications are a lot, because the market has realized that there is a large potential in Greece. So far, we have approximately 200 applications totaling 12 gigawatts, and we have licensed more than 7 gigawatts until now. 527 gigawatts pure batteries, and 150 megawatts hybrid, which is batteries and renewable energy storage units, and pump hydro storage 1.6 gigawatts. You can see that the number of the amount of hybrid units is quite small, because in July the ministry passed a law that withholds the licensing for hybrid units until December 2021. Major companies that have obtained licenses are again PPC, the major players in Greece, Mytilineos with Metka, Dairin, which is a developer, and behind Dairin is NL, also EDF, and other Terna, and other smaller players in Greece. But as you can see, all these figures are valid for a week, and if we present this in a week or 10 days, we may see 8 gigawatts of storage licensed. We have improved our licensing processes, and we are licensing quite fast. In the regulator, we believe that there must be no barrier to entry, and the more the better for competition. So that's all from the Greek electricity context. Now we will proceed with the second session, the revenue streams available in Greece and the storage system. And I will pass the floor to Mr. Konstantinos Petsinis, the transmission system operator representative. Kostas.
Thank you, George. Okay, I would like to thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity to make a brief introduction on the Greek balancing market and give you some insights on what are the opportunities for storage in Greece. I see a lot of people have already joined the webinar. This is very promising, and I really hope to see some of you in the market in the next years. I will start with a very brief introduction on the market. So, unlike most European countries, Greece applies a unit-based central dispatch model. This means that market participants do not schedule the units within their portfolios themselves. So scheduling of the units is performed centrally by the TSO. The tool to perform this process is the integrated scheduling process. On the figure on the right, you can see the four processes, the main processes that the Greek balancing market is comprised of. First, we'll start from below, the integrated scheduling process. So balancing capacity, or as more commonly known reserves,
are not procured in separate auctions. They are procured within this integrated scheduling process. The integrated scheduling process co-optimizes balancing capacity, balancing energy, also system constraints, and takes into consideration the technical characteristics of the units. So it is a very complicated process. To make a long story short, balancing capacity is procured twice per day for 2 12-hour periods. So the auctions take place approximately 1 hour before each of the 12-hour periods. Now I am moving to the next process, the automatic frequency restoration reserve process, also known as automatic generation control, AGC. This process requires real-time bidirectional communication with the TSO. So it's not very easy. Activations are performed every 8 seconds. Offers can be submitted in this process up to 15 minutes before real time. And we have offers for both directions, that is upwards and downwards. The pricing for this process is hybrid. And this means that it is mainly pay as bid. The compensation is pay as bid. However, one should receive at least the price, the marginal price that comes from the next process that's going to speak right now. So the next process is the manual frequency restoration reserve. This is a much easier process to be pre-qualified and to participate in. Again, the offers can be submitted up to 15 minutes before real time. And the TSO runs this process every 15 minutes. So usually the activations are done every 15 minutes. However, the TSO has the right to activate directly anytime. Well, this is the design of the Marie process as well. The Marie is the European platform for activation of manual frequency restoration reserves. This process is compensated marginally, so there's a marginal price here. Moving to the last process, the congestion management. This process, we do not have separate offers for this process. So we are using the offers that were submitted for the manual frequency restoration reserve. We also use some location and information in order to activate assets that are in a particular area and alleviate congestions. So this process is, again, compensated pay as bid. I think I forgot to say that also the capacity, the balancing capacity is also compensated pay as bid in the Greek market. I will now move to the participation rules for storage. I will not get in too much detail here. Generally speaking, the participation in the market for storage is voluntary. However, it can be mandatory in 2 cases. Firstly, in case storage receives a state aid. In this case, the exact rules will be in the state aid documents. For example, if somebody participates in a capacity remuneration mechanism, then there should be mandatory participation in times of shortage of energy. And secondly, the participation in the balancing energy market is mandatory in case or for the periods that somebody has been awarded with balancing capacity. Balancing capacity is a promise to give energy in the future. Therefore, the participation in balancing energy is mandatory. We can see here, I will tell you how many products we have in this market. This is a complicated market. So there are 3 products for balancing capacity, FCR, Frequency Containment Reserve, Automatic Replacement Reserve, and Manual Replacement Reserve. And these products have all two directions. So in total, we have 6 products for balancing capacity, which means that you have to separately bid for 6 products. And then for balancing energy, we have 2 processes, only manual replacement reserve and automatic replacement reserve. And we have also both directions. So there are 4 products for real-time energy activation. In total, 10 products for the balancing market. In the next slides, we will see some statistics on volumes and prices. Now I'm moving to the available revenue streams for storage. Firstly, I would mention the price spread. So one can take advantage of the price spread within each market, day-ahead market, balancing market, intraday market, or even across markets. For example, one could charge a battery in the day-ahead market, paying the price of the day-ahead market, and then discharge, providing balancing energy in the balancing market, thus being compensated with the upward balancing price. So here, the price spread between the day-ahead market and the balancing market would be relevant. We have already spoken about balancing capacity with 6 products. This is also very interesting for storage. Synergies with other technologies. Storage will be able to participate behind the meter with renewable energy sources. In this case, one can manage better the renewable unit and, among other, reduce the imbalances. Moreover, storage can increase the RES penetration in congested areas. Moving to congestion management, the TSO can determine some geographical areas with local problems. These are called red zones. So portfolios with assets in these red zones can be activated and help alleviate congestions. This comes, of course, with a payment. So this is a revenue stream for storage and is very important for storage and for the TSO as well. Now, new services. So the need for inertia and fast FCR in the future is deemed highly probable due to the decrease of system inertia because of the replacement of synchronous generators with non-synchronous technologies. So we might see in the future new products for these, for inertia and fast FCR. Voltage control currently is a mandatory service for production units and it is not paid. However, this might change in the future and provide another revenue stream for storage. And capacity mechanisms. I would like to say that at the moment it is planned to submit a proposal for a new CRM for Greece in the next few months. And of course, storage will be eligible to participate in this mechanism. Well, I hope all this didn't sound Greek to you. For some of you, it might be easy to understand. For some of you, might not. I will continue with some statistics. So this should be easier for all of you to get a grasp on the prices and volumes that in the Greek balancing market. So here we can see the spread between the upward and the downward balancing energy price. I should say that these prices are average prices. We couldn't plot actual prices, which are calculated every quarter hour for this period. So, in fact, obviously the spread of actual prices is much higher than what you see in this graph. And in fact, they can reach to thousands of euros within a day. Well, according to this chart, the average price spread is 90 euros per megawatt hour, and the maximum was 250 euros per megawatt hour. But even looking at average spreads, I think the values look very promising. I should remind you that balancing energy is compensated marginally. Now I'm moving to prices for balancing capacity, which is paid pay as bid. Again, here you can see only average prices, and this is average per provider per period of the day for both directions. So again, the prices can be much, much higher. In fact, here you can see that the most expensive product is AFRR, the green line, which on average reaches up to 7-8 euros per megawatt. The payment is per hour. So you can see here, this is euros per megawatt for providing the service for 1 hour. Again, we have observed a lot of times higher prices, as much as 20, very, very oftenly, and up to thousands again, but this is quite rare. I will move to volumes now. You can see here an indication of the weekly volumes traded in the balancing market. I should say that these volumes include all kinds of activations. Therefore, they include balancing energy, they include redispatching or activations for other regions like voltage control. So these are total volumes. If you take into consideration that the total consumption in Greece is around 50-52 terawatt hours per year, the total volumes in the balancing market can range up to 5 to 10% of the total volumes in the market. So this is again very promising for storage. Now I will present to you a daily profile for the volumes for balancing capacity. So these are the volumes that were auctioned by the TSO on the 7th of July 2021. You can see here the blue line is FCR is fixed at 47 megawatts, and AFRR and MFRR are close with each other, but they vary a lot. So you can see a range from 300 at night, in the morning, early in the morning, up to 800 in the evening, where the needs and the ramping is much more. Lastly, I will show you the same graph for balancing down capacity needs. As you can see, needs for balancing capacity down are much less than for upwards. You can see maximum of 180, and they don't vary that much. So I hope I shed some light on the Greek balancing market, and I think I will give the floor to Michael. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Kostas. This was very informative, as usual. I'm pretty sure a lot of people, judging from the questions that I glanced at, I can see that I was not the only one to learn new stuff here today, so I'm quite happy. I guess so. I'd like to take the floor and put the things that Kostas said into context. So two things that Kostas showed, and one that he actually specifically said. The first thing he showed is, during one of his slides, he showed that the balancing energy was on the order of, the amount was on the order, each direction, of 100 gigawatt hour per week. So usually years tend to have 52 weeks. So that means that you'd be, after a year, both upwards and downwards, probably around 4 to 5 terawatt hour. So for those of you that have, I would say, orders of magnitude in mind regarding electricity markets, that number is actually more or less the same number you'll find in a country like France. France is much larger than Greece, electrically speaking. So what this tells you is that the ratio between the amount of balancing energy versus the total consumption of the country is probably, I didn't make the exact ratio, but it's probably between 7 and 10%. Whereas, say, in continental Europe, the number is closer to 1 to 2%. So that ratio of 4 to 5 already should tell you that there is something specific in this country that we should look into, meaning there is a lot of need of balancing, which is probably not optimal for the country, or not optimal for the ratepayers in Greece, but it's optimal for storage, because this is the kind of situation that storage can help solve in a very economic way. That's one of the first thing Kostas showed, and I'm trying to reinterpret using my storage bias, or my storage interest. Now, another thing he showed average numbers of the balancing prices, both upwards and downwards. Well, they're very, very high. and the numbers he showed were actually average spreads. And as was discussed, it's a hybrid pay as bid, so that was explained already. So meaning that every quarter hour, which is the time step in these markets, there is essentially, of course, there's an average price that you can compute, but there's also a minimum and a maximum. So, and again, for us in the storage space, what we like is being able to not just get our spreads based on the averages, but to be able to go catch some of the best spreads we can. So we prepared this very simple graph, which, by the way, lacks AFRR. I apologize for this. We didn't have the time to review it, but let's say the numbers on AFR were not as impressive as the number on MFR, and please bear with me. So what we just made this little table, which is a summary of a summary of a summary of our analysis, that just tells you if storage was participating in the market, roughly based on the numbers for 2021. Actually, we looked at, to be very transparent, we looked at data between November 2020 and I think it was last June. So 6 or 7 months of data, which we extrapolated to be able to make business cases. We looked at how much money storage could generate if it was acting on those markets. So firstly, on the energy market, the day ahead and intraday markets, we're getting spreads that are here. Here, those spreads are expressed in megawatt hour. So that means the average, essentially the average delta you're making by buying low and selling high, of course, at this stage, neglecting anything such as grid fees. As you can see, for those of you that are used to building storage business cases, it's nice, but really not sufficient. Where we got a bit more excited, obviously, is for the two lines in green. So the first line is FCR. So for those of you that were sleeping through what Costa said, FCR is essentially a frequency containment reserve. Mainly, you're being paid for your capacity, the available capacity that is used to regulate the frequency kind of nonstop. And actually in this country, in Greece, if you're able to get the marginal prices and not the average price that Costa showed, okay? So he's a honest guy. He's showing average prices. I'm trying to beat the system, so I'm talking marginal prices. Then you could make something like 100,000 euro per megawatt per year. And I will make a long story short for you. In general, in Europe, if you want to repay your asset with maybe an 8% IRR over 10 to 15 years, you'd need something like 70,000 euro per megawatt per year, at least for a 1 hour battery. So that means that if as of today, your battery could participate in FCR in Greece, and if you were a savvy trader, you would make a lot of money. That's my second to last column. But my last column tells you that you would make a lot of money, but for a very, very small market. So probably it won't be interesting for so long. What I'm more interested in, and this is why we kindly ask Kostas to provide a bit more insights as a transmission system, as a TSO in Greece, we ask him to provide a bit more insight on the balancing market, is that if you were playing around, fooling around with your battery on the balancing market, actually, if you were only doing 1 cycle per day, okay, and assuming you were able to catch not the average spreads that Kostas was showing, but actually the max spread that that you could, theoretically assuming that you could get that, you would actually make, for each megawatt hour of battery installed, your annual revenue would be close to €250,000. So this is a lot of money. And this is the logical segue, logical continuation of what Kostas was saying, of what the numbers he was showing, essentially based on as I reminded you, the need for balancing energy in this country, which is high, and also the average prices that already show a big spread. And if the average prices show a big spread, as you can imagine, the marginal prices can be extremely lucrative. So then we played around and built a little, I would say, putative or theoretical business case for energy storage in Greece. So first of all, for those of you that are not used to, let's say, working with us, let me just show you how this is shown. What I'm showing here is, I'm showing everything here in terms of net present value, meaning I look at all the revenues on the left side of the screen that my storage asset could do theoretically. I'll come back to the theoretical point that I'm making here, but all of the revenues that it could make over the duration of the project, in this case 5 years, so both on MFRR and FCR, and those numbers are brought back to the present using an actualization rate of 8%, which means that if you're making €1 million this year, it has more value than if you're making €1 million next year. As a matter of fact, it has 8% more value. This is why I'm saying we're using an 8% actualization rate to bring everything back to the present. So that's on the revenue side, on the left side of the screen, on the light blue ones. The dark blue ones on the right side of the screens feature the cost of running the systems. Essentially, it's CAPEX, it's OPEX, and what we call here grid fees, which should actually be called grid fees and taxes, which we think are representative of a potential, what should be a real case in Greece, let's put it this way. And the difference between the total cost and the total revenue, the difference between the total revenues and the total cost is called the net present value. As you can see, this number is positive and it's green. Now, another way to interpret this graph that may be more, I would say, usual to most investors in the room is to not just look at the net present value if you had an 8% actualization rate, but actually take all the revenue numbers and the cost numbers and compute the IRR. And in this case, it's 29% over 5 years. So I repeat, in this case, the IRR for energy storage in Greece is 29% over 5 years. That sounds very good. It's unheard of in Europe. And as you can see from this little bar chart that I'm showing, is mostly thanks to, I would say, us catching some volatility on the balancing market. Okay. By the way, yes, we've been both aggressive and conservative in the way we assume we're going to catch the volatility. Number one, we are aggressive because we're making 2 cycles per day with our battery. That means that we're taking the best spread of the day and the second best spread of the day. So that's aggressive. But we've also been conservative because, as a matter of fact, even though we've decided to use a 20 megawatt hour battery, that is a 2-hour battery, we're actually only using 1 hour per day. So really, we just have an extra 10 megawatt hour just used for, contingencies. That's conservative. And obviously, we know that in real life, traders never catch 100% of the, the best spread they could do on the market. We know that they catch only a fraction of it. So we reduced the amount of revenue they could make on the market there. I think we reduced it by 40%. By the way, the question, okay, so I see questions popping up. I can't answer all of them, but essentially I'm talking here unleveraged. This is even before leverage. Okay, so this is really the amount of money you would get if you were participating with the battery in the market as of today. So what this means is don't invest just yet in Greece. Please do not do this yet, because my graph says ... in theory. Why? We made a lot of assumptions to build this. We made assumptions on the grid fees, which are very conservative. I won't get into this, but they're very conservative. And we also, of course, made assumptions that the past 6 months of market value were going to repeat themselves for the next 5 years. Of course, we have not modeled this as of yet. And also, we assume that the rules to participate are there, and participation is possible, legal, and has a framework. Voilà. And by the way, yeah, voilà. That's number one. That's it. But still, our angle here, the reason why we are excited about Greece, as I mentioned in the very first slide that I showed, which is the government is pushing forward using bringing up tenders to the market, number one. And number two, it's using this with funds coming from the RRF, as I mentioned, which could fund as much as 40% of the CAPEX, which, by the way, I have not included in this graph. The CAPEX here I'm showing is the actual CAPEX for a 10 megawatt, 20 megawatt hour battery. In this case, we used LFP. So those numbers are not here to tell you, please take all of your savings and invest them in a Greek project. You do whatever you want, but I'm not advising that. What those numbers are here for is to show you that if you use if you look at the fundamentals of this market and make reasonable assumptions of how things are going to evolve, hopefully in the next 6 to 12 months, this is the kind of profitability. This is how those numbers and those logical reasoning would translate in terms of storage business models in this country. So I strongly recommend, obviously, being extremely careful to what happens in Greece. And well, obviously, don't go by yourself, don't go alone. Obviously, you need consultants. I will not tell you which ones you should go with. I think I saw a question earlier. Now there's too many that came. My colleague is trying to answer, but I'm not sure she can answer as fast as they come. I think there was a question earlier that said, well, the 450 million euros by the RRF that are supposed to fund those batteries or those storage systems don't disclose the duration of the storage asset. So they do not say if it's going to have to be 1 hour, 2 hours, or 4 hours, or whatnot. The position I'm taking in this development that I'm making is perhaps the government tender will dictate that. I have no information on that, at least nothing that I can share. But what I'm saying is, if I take I would say a market approach to this, the answer should probably be, the answer should be that the investors will decide based on the amount of profitability they think they can extract from the markets, / based on the amount of storage they believe that the market needs. So if I look at the way storage gets developed in continental Europe, there's usually no mandate in terms of maximum sizes, or there's only minimum sizes to participate in the market. And whether investors decide to go for 1 hour, 2 hours, or 4 hours is based on their understanding and forecast of how the market will evolve. Voilà, so sorry it was a bit long, but I thought I wanted to condense everything that was said earlier into this one graph. And voilà, if you have, first of all, I'd like to thank you all for your attention. I'd like to thank especially George and Kostas for participating, Caroline and Andy for setting this up, and Rosemary in the back who's trying to answer all of your questions. I don't know how she's faring, but I would like to thank her as well. And let's see if we can take some questions, Andy, or we have a bit more time, so perhaps we can answer some of them.
Terrific, excellent. Thanks so much, Michael. And yeah, there's lots of questions coming in and lots of people on the platform. Just a few minutes to get them answered. I would like to note that if you would like to follow up in more detail and discuss these, the email address is up on the screen there. It's contact@cleanhorizon.com. Now, that said, there's quite a few questions referring specifically to the tender and the auctions. And I guess my basic impression is that we won't exactly know how those tenders will look until they are finally released. But there's a couple here that wonder if we can maybe just see what our views are. So Julian in the audience was asking if the recovery and resilience funding for the tender counts as state aid under European Commission rules. And does that mean that assets developed with funding would be mandatory participants in various balancing markets? And does that erode the revenue opportunity for battery energy storage if it makes use of that tender funding?
Well, I think I can take this, Andy, thank you. Well, first of all, as I already said, this will be in the documents of the state aid. So if there is any rule for mandatory participation, we don't really know yet. However, I don't see for the RRF, I don't see any reason to have mandatory participation. So a capacity mechanism is there in order to reassure the adequacy of the system. So because of this, the participation should be mandatory. However, I think that only the ministry can decide upon whether there will be something mandatory. But in any case, I would see this as something that will be designed based on the capabilities of storage. So I wouldn't see any barrier to entry here. This is just for storage. There couldn't be any rule for mandatory participation that would be a barrier to entry. But we should wait for that.
Okay, sure. And another question, I guess that's one for you, Kostas, is from Amela in the audience on whether the transmission operator is going to adapt to the net imbalance mechanism of ENTSO-E. So that's the Association of Transmission Operators with several of those across Europe for cross-border and cross-zonal balancing. And will that, I guess the other question to that is, how would that have an impact on the way you balance the system, I guess?
I'm not sure I understand the question. There is IGCC, which is the mechanism for imbalance netting across Europe. We already participate in that. However, we don't have a border to participate. So we are ready, but since Bulgaria and Romania are not participating in IGCC, there is no border to exchange energy with in Europe. This, in fact, would reduce a little bit the AFRR needs, but I don't see any particular effect on storage. Probably it will reduce a little bit the volumes of balancing. If I understand well the question, I'm sorry, I don't know if I understood well, but...
Okay, so maybe that's one for the audience member to follow up and maybe discuss it at a future date. Okay, there's a question here from Vikram, who asks that the tender is for just under 1,400 megawatts of storage, but licenses have been given for 7 gigawatts already through the regulator. So I guess this ties in with another question of what's the definition of a license and where does that sort of leave the opportunity for new entrants? And I wonder if George, this is one you can briefly take into, or Michael perhaps?
Okay. The definition of a license. The license is needed in order to be able to exercise the energy activity of storage. There are various beliefs how you could give the energy activity to someone. In North Europe, they just use a register. Everyone can participate. In Greece, we have some type of evaluation process which is not very heavy. I mean, it's intermediate in regarding difficulty. And generally, the trend is to simplify the licensing procedures, going towards having just a register. By simplifying the licensing procedure, you increase the participants and you have increased competition in any tender that you will have in the country. That's the theory. The fact that for 700 megawatts electricity storage, that the ministry is going to have a tender that will have 7,000, I mean, tenfold more than needed. This is a matter of the market, but it doesn't mean that all of them will be built. So I see there is no harm in having simplified licensing procedures, in my opinion. I mean, I support even lighter licensing procedures than the one we have in Greece.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, thanks very much for that, George. And I was just wondering on this question from Eleni, who's asking if the regulatory authority has any sense of the permitting process.
All right.
From,
yes.
Yeah.
Having light licensing, we put a heavy load in the. We increase the administrative load of the TSO, because all of those licensees, they go to the TSO and they require connection access to the network. And the network is a limited, the electrical space in the network, as we know, is limited. Nevertheless, I'm not supporting that in order not to create this administrative load to the TSO, you must artificially invent a barrier somewhere before. So this is my answer to Ms. Kanatsouli.
Okay.
There are ways to handle every problem, but the solution in my thought is not to create barriers previously.
Absolutely. I mean, one thing I've seen from reporting on the US market, for example, is that interconnection to the grid, the processes for doing that are somewhat complicated and, considered a bit of a barrier. But Kostas, from your point of view, how closely have you looked at sort of interconnection procedures, and what sort of dynamics do you expect to see when it comes to connecting large volumes of batteries and perhaps other storage to the grid?
Well, there is a large volume of applications, not only for storage, but for renewable energy sources as well. There is a big backlog of applications in the system. I think that the ministry is looking for a way to probably, I don't know, give some priorities to some of them or not. However, if we're talking about thousands of applications, you do understand that this cannot be done in a few months. I'm not really an expert on this issue, so I think, yeah.
Okay, sure. And I think we maybe just have time for one more question. But as I said, obviously everyone's asked lots of really interesting inquiries from the audience. Things that we probably don't have time to get into, such as the case for commercial and industrial energy storage, which we've certainly reported on some of at Energy Storage News, but not a huge amount as yet. But I understand that's a potential use case as well for shaving energy costs. So we'll finish with the one again on the final one on the tenders, I guess. And there's a few people asking whether there's going to be a technology neutral approach to the tenders at all, whether there'll be space for things besides batteries and pump storage, and kind of, things like kinetic energy storage or thermal energy storage. Do we know whether there will be? Should there be? Anyone got any particular views on that? And yeah, I was just wondering if that's something.
Not yet. Not yet. All the discussion is about electricity storage. Not yet. We don't have any indication about it. It has to happen. It has to happen, but at the moment, for the following months, the ministry and the task force will be working only on electricity storage, batteries and hybrid.
Okay, so we'll wait and see what happens with that. Okay, well, I guess that pretty much brings us to the end of today's session. I'd just like to once again thank, obviously, Clean Horizon for working with us. I can tell that, the audience have been hugely interested in this, and I think Michael's really enjoyed interacting with a lot of you, and sure that him and his team would love to follow up on a lot more of these topics. And certainly Kostas and George, we at Energy Storage News and Solar Media look forward to hearing more from you guys, as well as things really develop in the market. So I'd just like to say thank you very much, and thank you so much to our audience.